Matt George, if you've not heard, will be attempting to race the entire 3 hours in 2 different cars for 2 different teams. And he joins us on the line right now. Hello, good evening, Matt.
Hi guys, how you doing?
I'm well, thank you. You're live on Motorsport Radio. Thank you very much for coming on. So I suppose we should just start with the obvious question then, Matt. Why? Why are you doing this?
Believe it or not, you're by far not the first person to ask me this. I think it's a mixture of people thinking I'm mad and at the same time, I don't know. I think it's quite cool. So obviously, I'm currently a mentor for the drivers in the Invictus Games racing Jaguar cars, helping for their recovery through sport. So they're all ex-servicemen who we've brought up from never racing anything before into what is quite a high national level in the British GT Championship. And I raced in the Super Racing Aston Martin in 2016 in my first ever season car racing. And James Holder, the guy who I raced with and the guy whose brainchild Invictus Games racing is, thought that it would be a fantastic idea to come back to the championship, and why not to Silverstone, as it's always a fantastic race. And second of all, prove that it's in the spirit of Invictus. It's not just we're doing amazing things with the guys. I'm trying to prove as a mentor that I'm equally willing to work as hard as those guys are coming from scratch. And yeah, it's going to be an interesting challenge. I drove both cars for the first time on the same day last week, wow. And they couldn't be any more different.
Interesting.
So it's going to be a fantastic challenge, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Yes, we'll say it's going to be a fantastic challenge. I was looking for the right words for it, but I'll take your words and say yes, a fantastic challenge lies ahead for you. I'm sure Dan Marr, British GT expert here at Motorsport Radio, has loads of questions for you.
Yeah, just a few. Hi, Matt. Just one of the things that has been the interesting story in 2018 has been the debut of the brand new Jaguar F-Type SVR, and I think you sort of being one of the 2 pro drivers within the team to try and develop 4 different drivers over the course of the season. How have you found, even in your career of having raced in quite a few different championships but not having a lot of car racing experience, how have you found that transition to becoming a mentor?
Yeah, well, obviously, like you said, I've only been racing myself since 2016. And I've never raced in anything other than Pro-Am, so kind of mentoring is kind of what I'm used to as such, especially in my previous line of work where I was the driver coach at Base Performance Simulators before I became a driver myself. So the teaching side of things actually hasn't been too difficult. The main thing to learn is kind of how all the different people work, and because you can teach everyone the same thing and only a couple of people will be able to take it on. It's taking what they need to know and putting it in a way that each individual person understands. This year has been a particularly large challenge in a car from scratch as well that's completely unproven. And I know there's a lot of other new cars in the championship this year, but I mean, if you look at the likes of the Mercedes and the Audi, they've been developing those cars for probably 2 years now, whereas we are in our 7th month only of this Jaguar project. And every weekend, every day in the car is a learning experience, as much for me and our other pro driver, Jason Wolf, as it is for our 4 Invictus guys.
And for a car that's only 7 months old, to be leading at Snetterton, even with the massive pit lane gaggle a couple of weeks ago, it was still a great thing for your team to see it leading in what was only its 4th race in anything, really.
Yeah, massively. I mean, the pit stop infringement was a huge shame. I think To be honest, well, as you can imagine, we've done a lot of adding up since, and without the pit stop infringement, we could have still been on the podium, which for the guys at the team would have been absolutely outstanding. I mean, the whole team at David Appleby Engineering have been working, I don't joke you, 24/7, day and night, and to even see the car at the front was fantastic for all of them. It's just a shame that we didn't actually have the silverware to be able to put on the side and thank all the guys for all their hard work.
Nonetheless, though, to develop something like the Jaguar in such a short time frame, and with a mixed team of those who are not full-time motorsport professionals, some obviously the David Appleby Engineering also involved. For you, I suppose it must be a really nice satisfaction to see the car running so cleanly so early on within its life cycle. And you think Autumn Park, admittedly a challenge for the conditions, similar at Rockingham, you had a few technical issues I believe there as well, but the first dry running you really had, and all of a sudden bang, the car was there. It was quick.
Yeah, I mean, I've been very lucky in that I'm the only person to this day who's been involved in the car from day one. The wet has kind of been a bit of an Achilles heel at the moment, but it's something that we're working on. I mean, the biggest problem with going away to lovely sunny Italy during the winter to get lots of running is that you don't run in the rain. So Alton Park was our first ever time in the wet, and as you can imagine, a car with such engine capacity, torque and horsepower that the Jaguar does, it's a bit of an animal even in the dry. So in the wet, it's taking a lot of setup work, but it's something that, I mean, if you look at the difference from, say, session 1 at Rockingham to qualifying, we went from being 9 seconds off the pace to about 2. So the development is certainly happening, and happening very quickly.
One of the things you mentioned there was the size of the engine. I believe it's the 5-litre supercharged V8 in the car, and supercharged, you don't tend to see those on racing cars these days. How much of a challenge is that in engineering terms and drivability terms as well?
Yeah, so in terms of drivability, it's actually an incredibly easy thing to drive, in that the power is very linear. The only problem with that being is when you start to lose grip, i.e. when it's wet, you're getting all of your power instantly through the nature of how the supercharger works. So setting up a car to be able to deal with that is quite difficult, and obviously to drive with, I mean, if anyone saw the onboard video that British GT posted from my lap at Rockingham, it's literally taming a wildcat.
Very good, a very good way to describe the Jaguar there. Now, there's already been a series announced for some of the older racing drivers. I think it was mooted as an over 50 thing, with a field full of Jaguar F-Type GT4 cars. McLaren are doing something similar with the 570S, but where do you see, from the team's perspective and your perspective, where this car is going to go? Is it going to do more with customer hands, or is it just going to stay with David Appleby Engineering? Or
to be honest, that's a question that I think everyone, Jaguar, David Appleby, ourselves, we're all quite far away from being able to answer yet. The Series Elite thing for over 50s is it's a championship that will come about, and I'm sure will be absolutely fantastic. In terms of how far the car goes from there, to be honest, nobody knows. I mean, we're so early on in our development. When the car turns into a fully working, reliable GT car, then I'm sure the interest will come to spread further afield. But I mean, to be honest, right now we're so focused on getting these two cars, as they're the only ones in the world, to run properly in British GT, and hopefully towards the end of the season, maybe at Silverstone this weekend, who knows, we'll start to be able to show what the car's really capable of, because I don't honestly think we've fully extracted that yet.
And bringing it back to Silverstone then, you mentioned you're hoping to get the pace out of the Jaguar, which is the newest GT4 car on the package, but then you'll also be racing in the oldest car in GT4 terms on the package in the Aston Martin V8 Vantage. And I think you sort of briefly mentioned earlier there'd be differences, but the characteristics of the car, how different are they?
If you look on paper, you'd say probably not that different. To drive around the Silverstone Grand Prix circuit, completely different. It's the nature of, as you touched on, old versus new. If you look at the modern day GT cars, they're a lot sharper, the aero is a lot more efficient. So it's two completely different cars. I mean, to be completely honest, they're really not comparable in terms of how they drive. But, you know, the Aston has been the only race car I've ever driven up until starting this Jaguar development. So driving that at the same time as my current car, I'm massively excited for. It's going to be a huge challenge, as much for driving the two different cars as the fact that I've got to drive for 3 hours straight. I mean, like the pedal efforts in the car, the steering weights in terms of the power steering, literally everything is different. So the fact I've got to make that transition between the two cars twice, so it's going to be a big challenge. But like I said, in the nature of Invictus, we're up for absolutely anything. So bring it on.
Excellent. And just one final question from me. I think Connor's got a few questions for you as well, so just hold tight for a bit. But what have British GT, the championship themselves, done to try and aid you and both teams to try and run the cars at the same time? For example, are you the two teams next to each other in pit garages, or are you going to have to run all the way down one Silverstone pit lane to get all the way back up again, or...?
No, so the guys at British GT are incredibly accommodating. We've managed to get my two cars next to each other in a garage, which is going to save me an awful lot of time, especially as there's a good chance that the cars will be pitting on the same, if not very close to the same lap, with how it has to work for minimum driver times. So getting up and down the pit lane just wouldn't be feasible, really. They've helped us stay in touch with all the other teams on the paddock, because we've had to have special permission to be able to do this, because as far as I'm aware, it's the first time in British GT anyway that it's been done before. And obviously with the nature of Pro-Am, we're going to have to be ever so slightly offset in that obviously in British GT the amateur drivers, if you're in a Pro-Am car, have to start the race, but I can't start, but the AMs can't start two cars at the same time, because then when it comes around to the Pro session, I can't drive two cars. So we've had to have special permission to do that, but all the other teams on the grid have been massively accommodating, and I think they all appreciate that it's a really cool thing to do. It's nice to be able to prove that you can kind of do anything if you put the work in to do it.
Well, it's a fantastic message that's being put out there by British GT. Well, thank you for answering my questions anyway, Matt. If you've got any questions, if you're listening at home, do get in touch at M Sport Radio and on Motorsport Radio. We are live currently here on Monday Motorsport. Please do keep leaving all your comments. I believe Connor, though, has a few other questions.
Yes, just a few to quickly follow on, Matt. I hope you can hear me. You obviously mentioned that the two cars will obviously be side by side in the garages, and obviously they've been very accommodating for you. But for yourself, obviously, I know there's limits in things like in many sports car series around the world about how long a driver can be in a car for often safety reasons. Are you concerned, if nothing else, about fatigue, especially towards the end of the race? This is obviously a 3-hour stint that you will be doing at least most of the race for.
Yeah, so basically how it works is it's 4 45-minute stints starting in the Aston with a maximum of probably 6 minutes out of the car throughout the whole race. So you can split that into one stint being 41 minutes or whatever. And the longest stint I've ever done actually came in the Gulf 12 hours this year, which was 2 hours, and I'm not going to lie, I was absolutely shattered by the end of it. and I've got quite a lot of good friends who race in the Blancpain series, and as you're aware, a lot of them double stinted at the start of the race. And they were all saying they were knackered as well. So I'm not going to lie, there is a little thought in the back of my head that makes me a little bit nervous about it. But, you know, I've been preparing so hard with the guys at Boomerang Pro Fitness. I've got an amazing support team around me. I've got a good plan of what I'm going to do. I'm confident in my head of how I'm going to get through the 3 hours, not just in terms of driving, but I've got 3 pit stops to do in that time as well, so I can't afford any mistakes, and get into the end as quickly as possible in both cars.
Fantastic. Also, you briefly mentioned there about the Golf 12 Hours. Now, as far as I'm aware, you won that race last year, didn't you?
Yes, we won it, yeah.
Obviously, I think that was your first Golf 12 Hours as well, so it must be a fantastic achievement to win what's such a prestigious event so early in your career.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, in 2015, I was only dreaming of being a racing driver, and then in 2017, I'm winning races at circuits like Abu Dhabi. I mean, it's nobody pinch me.
That was a GT3 car, I believe you were racing with the Golf 12 Hours, or no, it was a GT4. I do apologise, but obviously it was a very packed field, that race, and obviously dealing with night driving, etc. With the Silverstone race coming up, obviously there isn't as many cars on track, but there is a lot of pressure from the GT3s behind. Have you been in your early career, have you found it difficult to deal with the fact that there are faster cars on you and with you on track, and you have to deal with the pressure from behind, or is that something you've managed to quickly adapt in these first few years of driving?
To be honest, it's something that I've never really thought about too much. Obviously, my first year of racing ever being in British GT, I don't really know anything that different. I mean, for sure, it's something that you have to think about, because it's such a massive factor. I mean, you can gain and lose such a huge amount of time in how you deal with the GT3 cars. And I've been very, very lucky in the short period that I have been racing to have opportunities in GT3 cars, so you start to understand the car's strengths and weaknesses, which I believe is a definite positive, in that you understand where they're going to catch you and where they're not, and how to let them pass without losing any time. Because there's a lot of places and corners on circuits now where the GT4 cars have picked up so much. There isn't actually that much difference between the GT3s and GT4s. So being aware of that and being prepared for that when one's coming up behind you flashing their lights is definitely something that I think about, and I pass on to all the guys that were mentoring at the race weekends to think about before every race weekend, because it's so easy to win and lose a race in that.
Well, Matt, it's certainly been fascinating having you sort of explain exactly in depth as well, because I know there was a lot of people who saw maybe or maybe on social media, GT Championship put this news out there and think, what? What's what's all this about? Yeah, it's. I guess we'll just have to wait and see, because we will be there at Silverstone, following your progress closely and trying not to bother you and confuse you and get in your way and accidentally making you dive in the wrong car at the wrong time. But I guess we'll just have to say, really, good luck, because as you say, I don't think, as you mentioned, I don't think anyone else in GT has tried this before. Maybe some historian is listening right now to this and they can set the record straight and correct us. But if you're going to be the first person ever in British GT to try this, then way to go.
Cool, thank you very much.